The state of the Wisconsin economy today and looking to the future. This morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. To the extent that Wisconsin can control its own economic destiny, arguably three of the most important drivers will be a statewide growth and development strategy, business owners already at work here in Wisconsin, and perhaps the biggest engine of them all, the University of Wisconsin. We have representatives from all three areas with us this morning. First, Paul Jaden, CEO and Secretary of the Wisconsin Economic Development Commission. Wisconsin Economic Development Commission. It is commission, right?
Wisconsin Economic Development
Corporation, which is marking the end of its first year, replacing the Wisconsin Department of Commerce as the state's leading economic development agency. Kurt Bauer, president of Wisconsin's leading business organization, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and Charles Haslett, senior special assistant to the chancellor, UW Office of Corporate Relations. And thank you all very much for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
I'm going to start with you, Secretary Jaden. Again, just because it's been almost a year now, it's a good opportunity to sort of reflect on the first year of the WEDC. But maybe you can put it in the context of what we're seeing today economically in this state.
Yeah, obviously we're in a situation where the global and national economy controls a lot of what's going on here. We just got through a tumultuous year, of course, politically in Wisconsin. But I think the governor has set a very good foundation for going forward, and particularly through the WEDC, we have a situation where we've got all our structure in place. We've created 4 divisions that give us abilities we didn't have a year ago in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation, business and industry, our marketing efforts, and then obviously internationally, which we're going to talk a little more about today.
I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the political turmoil. I think it's been gone over and over. But I just want you to tell us if it indeed pushed economic development to the sidelines, as has been discussed.
I think clearly there were people who were waiting to see what happened on June 5th. And we've had calls after that, both internally and outside of Wisconsin, from people saying, okay, now let's talk again. In fact, there were people who we engaged probably 9 months ago and haven't heard from since. And then in mid-June called us back and said, okay, well, let's have a meeting. We want to look at Wisconsin again.
Kurt, how would you describe the sentiments of your members right now here in July of 12?
I think you said it very well in your intro when you said that our destiny is really tied to what's going on nationally and globally. And that gives me pause because you look at, we just came from China, and the Chinese economy isn't churning like it normally does, probably not going to be at 8% growth, which it typically averages. You're looking at Brazil is slowing down. Of course, we've got a meltdown taking place in Europe. So that is very alarming to us in the business community as far as markets for exports and just the overall confidence in the economy. Having said that, our surveys of our membership, and we represent 3,500 businesses from all sectors of the economy, both small and large businesses, indicate that they're very optimistic about the direction that the state is at least heading in. Their concerns generally are at the federal level. They're very concerned about the overregulation that they see. The United States now has the highest tax on corporations in the industrialized world, and they see other headwinds basically coming from the federal government. So I think there's some optimism. I think it's kind of a bipolar economy. You get good news one day. Today, of course, we got job numbers. They were not particularly good. It's kind of a mixed bag.
I'm going to talk about China a little bit later in the show, but I kind of want to stay on the state here for a minute. And Charlie, I'm going to ask you to just sort of wear your OCR hat here, and I would imagine that to some degree the calls to your office from businesses around the state is reflective of a sentiment about the direction of the economy. What are you hearing?
I think that's right. What we're seeing is growth and interest really in all sectors. Large companies, we're having a good number of interactions with larger companies, not just from the state, but from other states, companies in other states that are interested in learning more about the university and how we might be able to help them. Medium-sized businesses, small businesses, and of course startups, and hopefully we'll talk about entrepreneurship a little bit later.
We will.
Is really a growth sector, and we're working closely with Paul's folks in that area. We're working with Kurt in terms of the manufacturing companies around the state. So Our numbers, preliminary numbers for the fiscal year that just ended, look like they're going to be up over last year in terms of the numbers of opportunities that people have called us about. So we're excited about that.
All right, I'm going to look for help from any of you here on this. You mentioned it, Kurt. It's this sort of bipolar economy that we're in. And job numbers, especially in Wisconsin, continue to lag behind what we all want, what we all think is healthy. And yet, it wasn't more than a month ago, I think, that Manpower came out and said, Milwaukee was #1, I believe, in the country for job growth potential, and Wisconsin was tied with Michigan in the top 10 for job growth potential. How do we balance those numbers? How do we understand that?
We certainly have problems with the numbers that are coming out of BLS, and obviously we look at the more concrete data that's reliable and based on a larger survey.
That's federal
and so
stuff,
forth.
Paul, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is what you're talking about?
Yeah. And obviously the projections from a variety of sources, including Manpower, show that Wisconsin's going to be in the upper half in terms of job growth over the next 3 years. And I simply look forward to a year where we're going to see far more investment in entrepreneurship, as well as opportunities to grow our existing industrial base in Wisconsin.
Kurt, I mean, your members are looking at this. They must see the growth opportunities here, but they're not hiring yet. Is that fair to say?
They're optimistic, but it hasn't translated into hiring. They are indicating that they're planning on doing more hiring this year and into the first part of next year. We'll have to see if the economy justifies that. But what we're seeing is you've got consumer confidence and you've got business confidence. Consumer confidence, it's kind of lagging a little bit. Business confidence ties into that very closely, and if businesses aren't confident, then they don't want to hire. What they'll do is, if they see their orders increase, they'll go with overtime. They'll do temporary workers. Sometimes they're reluctant to make the investment on hiring, and again, some of that is based on the concern about where the economy is headed, both internationally and in the United States. But some of it also is kind of the drags that we place on employment. There is a tremendous amount of uncertainty, say, with the health care law. That is listed in many of the business group surveys as the #1 drag. They're just not sure what it means and what their employment costs are going to be going forward.
Is this consistent statewide, Paul, or are there any regions that look like they're emerging better than other regions? Can we talk about Milwaukee specifically?
I think Milwaukee is probably one of those areas where you're seeing investment in certain areas that will take off. I mean, water technology is an area where we've invested. It's one of our 14 projects that we implemented last year, and I think manufacturing in certain areas in the southeast is also doing very well. But there are other things that are going to prevent them from breaking out, and I think Kurt touched on some of those reasons. It's that dichotomy of we think we're in a position to hire and invest, but we've got to wait and see what happens with Obamacare, or we've got to wait and see what happens in the November election.
All right, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about this trip to China, which I think was a pretty important trip, when we come back right after this. My guest this morning, three of the leading business voices in the state. Paul Jaden, who is the CEO and Secretary of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Kurt Bauer, who is the President of Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. And Charles Hoslet, an old friend of this show, who is a senior special assistant to the Chancellor for the UW Office of Corporate Relations. And Charlie, let me start with you in terms of this trip to China. UW had a big delegation go along. Maybe you can just sort of give us an overview of the goals of this. I mean, there was an office opened in Beijing by UW. So.
The university's had a long history of engagement with China and with East Asia generally. And this is an opportunity, this opening of a new office in Shanghai is an opportunity to put a physical presence there. As these guys will tell you, having face-to-face and constant communication and developing relationships is so important to these things when you're halfway around the world. And this is going to be an opportunity for us to do a number of things. One is strengthen relationships with Chinese universities that we're already working with. A second is to provide opportunities for our students to go over there, both in terms of study abroad programs and international internship opportunities with companies. There's researcher-to-researcher academic exchanges, and there's going to be an opportunity for the university and the business community in the state of Wisconsin to really get engaged with companies that are over there.
I don't know if WMC has had these types of relationships at this level, Kurt, like the UW has for many, many years. What did you get out of this trip?
Well, too many things that I could mention. I'm still processing all I've gotten out of this trip. It was really an amazing experience on so many different levels. But
new opportunities, right?
New
Kurt?
opportunities, to be sure. But as a relatively new head of WMC, just in the post for over a year, my members who have been doing business in China for many years really wanted me to see it firsthand, because what's going on over there is truly amazing. And you can hear about it, but you've got to see it to truly understand it. And you're looking at the most rapid industrialization of a nation, from largely a agrarian society into an industrialized society in world history. And it is something to behold. Creates tremendous opportunities for Wisconsin businesses over there, and it also creates opportunities now for Chinese businesses to invest in the United States. So I think there's great opportunity both ways.
I don't know if there's a better example, Paul, than the press release that came out this week out of your office on Wisconsin companies interested in seeking investment capital from a Chinese investment firm.
Yes.
One of the takeaways from
we signed a memorandum of understanding in Beijing with the PE company, and they're a group of investors, all extraordinarily high net worth individuals who want now to move into the international economy and are looking at investing as much as $100 million in Wisconsin. So we're putting out a call to potential companies, probably going to be putting 25 companies in front of these investors in September when they do their visit to the United States. And there would be somewhere between $2 and $15 million invested in each of the final companies. So this is a new effort, and probably the most significant thing that I took away from the China trip was the notion that it's time for them to start doing more foreign direct investment, and you may even see more provincial investment from China as well.
I know you're all promoting this to in your own individual ways, but there are going to be people watching this show today, business owners who think, maybe I could get a piece of this action. They can contact you, right, and see what's available there.
Yes, by I believe it's July 18th. We want to hear from people who may have a need for investment. In the next year, you're going to see about a $300 to $350 million investment need in Wisconsin, and we can't fill that right now. So this is an opportunity for us to take care of some of that gap.
Are there businesses in this state now, Kurt, that will on their own work to further relationships in China?
They're already doing it. Foreign trade is a $22 billion a year industry in the state of Wisconsin. We want to expand that. I think China is number 3 right now, but I think it's probably going to become number 2 fairly soon as far as our trading partners. There is great opportunity, not just in China, but in the Pacific Rim. I mean, that is the most dynamic economy in the world right now. India, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. And we're actually seeing a lot of our manufacturers move to Vietnam because the Chinese economy has evolved to the point where they're more like ours. They do advanced manufacturing, and the labor costs are cheaper in some of those emerging economies in Asia. It's very dynamic and very interesting, and Wisconsin companies have to be a part of it.
I know this almost defines the new Wisconsin idea, Charlie. But I mean, is this technology transfer opportunities that?
Absolutely, it's across the board. It's tech transfer opportunities. It's opportunities to work on innovative technologies with our Chinese counterparts. It's opportunities to help Wisconsin companies that are literally doing business around the world. And again, this new office in Shanghai gives us an actual physical presence to be even more helpful than we have been to date.
Kurt, there are some people that are going to get nervous hearing cheap labor and jobs overseas. How do you balance that in terms of economic development in Wisconsin and job growth in Wisconsin?
Well, the interesting thing is that most businesses, whether they're Wisconsin or an American company, when they go overseas, they're manufacturing for the Asian economy, for the Asian markets. That's the real opportunity they want to tap into. I mean, you're looking at a population in China of 1.3 billion people. It is the second largest economy in the world. I think it's destined to become the #1. And so when companies move to China, they're largely trying to satisfy an Asian market, not importing back to the United States.
Okay. Are there other areas in the world? I mean, everybody's looking at China, but is this the beginning of a new global, increasingly global role for Wisconsin?
For us, it certainly is. We have offices coming into last year in China, Brazil, Mexico, and Canada, and we're trying to extend that to 12 countries. So you're going to see more of a network in Europe, in the Middle East, probably Africa. We did a trip recently to India, so you're going to see more investment there. Vietnam, as Kurt said, is an extraordinary emerging market. So all of those Southeast Asian countries are critical, but we can't ignore Europe and the Middle East in particular.
When we come back, I want to talk about entrepreneurism, kind of from... I'm back with Paul Jaden, Kurt Bauer, and Charles Huslett, and we are talking about the state of the Wisconsin economy here and globally, as a matter of fact. And I want to talk about, Charlie, this year kind of wraps up a 5-year opportunity funded by the Kaufman Foundation grant, which was a significant grant. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to fund some innovative projects. Talk about what was accomplished during those 5 years, sort of in the context of the university's role in business growth and development.
Sure. So we were privileged enough to have received a $3 million grant over the last 5 years from the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation out of Kansas City. The goal of that grant, as we've talked about in this show before, was really to push entrepreneurship, education, and activity out across the entire campus. The UW has had a long history of being entrepreneurial, and you can go all the way back to 1925 and look at WRF, which is as entrepreneurial as it gets, particularly for a university. But we've got the Weinert Center for Entrepreneurship, we've had Insight, we've had a number of things, but over the last 5 years what we've done is pushed those activities in that need and excitement about entrepreneurship out across the entire campus. So right now, 8 of our 13 schools and colleges at UW-Madison are somehow actively engaged with entrepreneurship. We have new courses for our students. We have lots of events and activities. We have an entrepreneurs resource clinic. There's a law and entrepreneurship clinic. We've done some things in the technology commercialization area in partnership with WRF. So we're not only teaching our students how to think entrepreneurially, we're teaching them how to start companies, and we're seeing more and more of that.
Kurt, talking to people on campus who interact daily with business leaders, this is described as in part a response to a demand by businesses for a more entrepreneurial climate in this state, and that indeed it is helping to create that climate. Are you seeing that?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go to China with the university is to show that solidarity that the business community wants to stand with our major research university, because that is one of the major drivers of innovation that you need for startup businesses. Another one would be venture capital, and we tried to pass venture capital legislation last session. WMC wasn't terribly involved last session. We will be involved this next coming session that begins in January, because that's another one of those components that you need in order to have a strong entrepreneur class in the state.
How does this complement your work, Paul, this climate of entrepreneurship in this state?
It's absolutely critical, particularly when you look at the role that the university plays in the state's economy. We're investing in a vice president of economic development who reports directly to the president of the system, Kevin Riley, and that's going to be an important piece for us because it gives us an opportunity to better appreciate what's happening at the university in terms of bringing ideas to commercialization. And then also, as Kurt said, the role that WMC can play in getting a new venture capital or angel and seed investment program developed in the state next year is going to be absolutely critical. It was one of the things that we lamented most about the last session. We've got to have significant new investment to help the entrepreneurs and innovators in this state who are looking for $350 million in the next year.
Did WEDC meet its goals for this year?
I think, well, if you look at the 5 metrics, we're probably doing better on engaging business. Our extended enterprise has done as well as we had hoped. I think obviously job numbers are paramount, and until we get to the numbers that are necessary for the governor to meet his goals, we're not going to be comfortable. So going into next year, we've got to show that we're hitting our 50,000 job goal of jobs created and retained, and then the macroeconomy has to do more in terms of getting the rest done.
This is a first for us. We've never had a department like this, a public-private kind of department like this in state government. And I would say, I would say that it has kept a lower profile in the last year than typical Department of Commerce, big build Wisconsin, grow Wisconsin kind of efforts.
Yeah.
By design, would you expect that to change?
It really was by design. In fact, the last vice president we hired was marketing. So we weren't telling the world who we were enough. I think this year you're going to see an awful lot more. We're going to be unveiling a marketing campaign, in fact, in September, which we shared with our board of directors a week ago. And so I think as we go forward, you're going to have a better idea of what exactly has happened in terms of those new divisions we created with entrepreneurship and innovation, business and industry, marketing and international. And while we tell the story of who the WEDC is and what we have to offer, we'll also have an opportunity to tell the state's story about the kind of business climate it has to offer.
Well, isn't that a consistent theme? We don't tell the world enough who we are.
Absolutely.
It's Midwestern humbleness.
Yeah, well, but it's got to change, right?
Absolutely.
Well, we have been, as Paul said, we've been distracted. Wisconsin has kind of missed out on the last year and a half with this recall. Now I think we can really focus. And I think that there's tremendous opportunity. Again, I'll stress our surveys. Our businesses in this state are optimistic about the reforms that we've been able to enact. And I think we're primed for growth. Of course, it depends on what happens globally and the national economy, but I do think Wisconsin's positioned very well that when we do have a sustained recovery, I think that you're going to see the job growth and we're going to see the other benefits of a growing economy in the state.
Well, I know that the entrepreneurship efforts on campus are going to continue. There are a variety of them that, and the law school, the business school, to complement this stuff. So. Thank you all for taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
Good conversation, and we're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. It's just like. My thanks to Paul Jaden, Kurt Bauer, and Charles Hoslett for joining me this morning. Next week, we'll welcome former Senator Russ Feingold to the program. It's next Sunday. Thanks for watching. See you next week.